Hello, my name is Charles Upton. I'm going to read something called A Letter to Jordan Peterson. Dear Dr. Peterson, though I am fairly new to your story, and so far I've only met you via your YouTube videos, I believe that I have seen you, and also, though I certainly don't agree with you on every point, that I've seen a little of myself in you. To briefly introduce myself, I am a Sufi Muslim, a poet, a writer on metaphysics and social criticism, and what is called a perennialist. This last designation explains why I often bring forth lore and doctrine from various different religions, since the perennialists hold that God has sent more than one valid revelation, and that more than one of these revelations can be alive and spiritually operative at the same time. I'm also old enough and persistent enough to address from personal experience the ethos of the 1960s counterculture, the political activism of the 80s, the New Age movement of the 90s, and some of the social activism of today, including an international Muslim interfaith peace movement I helped to found called the Covenants Initiative. What I propose to do in this video is to add a drop of the metaphysical and operative spiritual tincture to your already highly potent elixir of biology, psychology, social psychology, and incipient theology. Your motion has been from psychology and sociology toward theology and metaphysics. Mine has been from metaphysics toward psychology, and social action. You certainly have half the story, the ascent of the focused masculine energy from the underlying chaos and all potentiality of the Great Mother, but you're missing much of the other half, though you show definite gleams of it, the descent of the form-giving masculine principle as a ray of primal generosity from the celestial Father, the God whom Aquinas defined as pure act. Yes, particular forms are limitations, which is why they can degenerate into ideologies. The same is not true, however, of total form. Absolute essence. Absolute essence is the eternal form of all potentiality. All potentiality is the dynamic aspect, the Shakti of absolute essence, the yang and the yin, which is why psychology needs to be complemented and completed by metaphysics. On the other hand, you were totally right when, in The Necessity of Virtue, you said that God, who is all and nothing, cannot be said to be. And how can what has no being be either known or followed? Whereas if we take up the cross of limitation, many things become possible. In a similar vein, the Sufi Bediüzzaman Said Nursi writes, I quote, "Question, why did God make our selfhood, our ego, a means to know his attributes and names? Answer, an absolute and all-encompassing entity has no limits or terms and therefore cannot be shaped or formed. Neither can it be determined in such a way that its essential nature can be comprehended. For example, an endless light undetermined by darkness cannot be known or perceived. But whenever a hypothetical bounding line of darkness is drawn, i.e. the ego, it becomes determined and known." Said Nursi goes on to say that when the ego takes itself to be self-subsistent and self-created, it becomes the source of all evil. But when it recognizes itself as created by Allah and as having no intrinsic being other than His, it becomes the source of all good. Here is a poem I recently wrote dedicated to you and your struggle. If you go to war against chaos and armed delusion with the weapons of character and intelligence alone, you will need the power and the subtlety of God to strengthen your arm and sharpen your eyes. God is not in the arm, however, nor is he in the eyes. He is dead center in the heart, beyond feeling and behind it, beneath even the pulse of the subtle knowings. You fear he might exist? Continue to fear him then, until the thunderous peace of certainty arrives to redraw the lines of battle. No Islam, no Christianity, no theology without God, no courage without love, no uprightness without prostration. The forged lie that sophisticated theology and profound metaphysics are opposed to the simplicity of faith is a central pillar of this lying world. if you are bound to that pillar now, eyeless in Gaza at the mill with slaves, then rise and tear down the temple of this lying world that is upheld by it, not with hair shorn, but with might in every strand of it, power from the fountain and the source of power. As when God told Muhammad when he threw a handful of pebbles at the enemy at the Battle of Badr and so turned them, it was not you who threw when you threw, but I threw. As when St. Paul said, our strength is perfected in weakness. As when God spoke to Job out of the whirlwind. What can you or I do, Jordan, unless we cross the river of your namesake before we die and rest under the shade of the trees? One step across the infinite extent of the Planck distance, one step from here to here. Before they ask, says the guide in whose shoes we walk, I will answer. All our lives we have walked in the echo of that answer. I would now like to respond to a quote of yours, probably not exact because quoted from memory. The purpose of life is to find the hardest possible challenge and meet it. This is the battle cry of a man of character and intelligence, and of one who also possesses the courage to suffer for the sake of courage and intelligence, character and intelligence. Yet, perhaps, only perhaps, there is one term missing in the equation, the insight and the willingness to cast one's burdens upon the Lord. To cast one's burdens upon the Lord. Now, I hazard to estimate that 99.9% of the people who might approach you with this observation would add, and the nature of that burden, Dr. Peterson, is intellectual pride. The lion must become the lamb before he can be washed in the blood of the lamb. This, however, is not what I say. Christ is not only the lamb, but also the lion. And the lion has his companions who are also called his pride. As the saying goes, man's extremity is God's opportunity. When seeking ever harder challenges, we don't just increase the insight and courage and purity of intent of our known selves. Rather, we meet those challenges with ever deeper layers of the self, with ever deeper selves, most of them heretofore unsuspected. We have to dig down deep past the complexes, past the primitive and universal reactions and strategies of our organic beings, to the deeper psychic layers, then to the angelic layers, past even Jung's self-archetype, all the way to the self of selves, to the place where, in Meister Eckhart's words, my truest I is God. The sixth line of hexagram 59 of the I Ching says, he dissolves his self, no remorse, to which Richard Wilhelm comments, quote, under certain circumstances, a man's work may become so difficult that he can no longer think of himself. He must set aside all personal desires and disperse whatever the self gathers about it to serve as a barrier against others. Only on the basis of a great renunciation can he obtain the strength for great achievements. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, says substantially the same thing. Die before you die. I would add that this renunciation is announced by and embraces, but also goes beyond the renunciation represented by what G.I. Gurdjieff called intentional suffering, since it culminates in the renunciation of the very self that suffers. This is what the Sufis call annihilation in Allah. In seeking deeper and deeper challenges, the task finally becomes so difficult that only God can perform it, and has, in fact, strangely enough, already done so. So I must now contradict myself and agree that the lion at one point does indeed become the lamb led to the slaughter. But the death of the lamb leads in turn to the resurrection of the lion. According to the Islamic Hadith Qudsi, a tradition in which Allah himself speaks, who seeks me finds me, who finds me knows me, who knows me loves me, who loves me I love him, whomever I love I kill, whomever I kill I myself am his blood price. So I would advise you, Dr. Peterson, to hurry up and cast your burdens on the Lord, thereby invoking not solace, which is only fantasy, but his true mercy. Remembering Flannery O'Connor's phrase, the terrible speed of mercy. And not only mercy, but power, seeing that the war against transpersonal forces cannot be fought by human persons without transpersonal help. We fear this mercy and this power. They are so much more formidable than even the terrible forces arrayed against us that we can hardly imagine ourselves totally opening the door to them without getting squashed like a bug. Nonetheless, God will strengthen us both to withstand his mercy and to wield his power. And his greatest help in this regard is his gift of the certainty that, in the last analysis, no one is acting but he. This is a knowledge that only love can accept. And love, in the words of William Butler Yeats, love is like the lion's tooth. If we give everything to him, precisely by recognizing that everything comes from him, and so by whatever gift we claim to give him, we are only paying back a loan, we can be certain that whatever he hands back to us, with the message attached, "You deal with this now," will not be some made-up pose or neurotic obsession, but the real thing. I obviously don't expect you to change your path from mine. Nor do I have either the desire nor the capacity to change my path for yours. Nonetheless, I believe that there is a real point where your path and my path could meet face to face, and that some very interesting things might happen at this point of meeting, things having to do with the nature of the deity, the positive and negative aspects of religion, shadow integration versus the struggle to live up to norms of virtue, the mysterious identity between assuming personal responsibility and submitting to the will of God, etc., etc. Therefore, any response from you will be gratefully received and seriously pondered. Sincerely, Charles Upton.